of that will allow you to be distinctive. And so you see there, a brand is the promise of a customer experience each time there is an interaction with your company. So that's what we're looking for. If you're going to deliver a product or service to a customer, you want to process that out in your mind, and you want to make sure that every time a customer interacts with your customer, that this experience meets your expectations. And then what we want it to do is be different enough that you have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. In the end, customers generally want three things, and then there's always the chance we have someone online or in the group here that's got that wants to create something. But generally, customers will respond to saving money. They will respond to ways to make money. They will respond to filling their own needs and wants on a multitude of levels. And then, of course, there are those great entrepreneurs who occasionally create a need or want. The best example of that in history, of course, may be Steve Jobs, who conceived of the iPhone. I don't think we all knew that we needed an iPhone until they actually came out with it. He wasn't the first to think of phones or anything along those lines, but he did identify a real customer experience that drew people into Apple and has made them one of the most profitable firms on the planet. Don't forget, Apple started in a garage in California, so they were small in that particular. So what we're looking for and what we want you all to do is we want you to create a customer experience and think through that, and the cost will take care of themselves. So, products and services. Some of you will have products, some of you will have services, some of you will have both, okay? It just depends on what your offering is going to be. But you need to make that determination on what you're going to offer the market. So you need to be able to think through that and come up with some ideas. There's nothing wrong with going through this business planning process and making sure that you think through that and that you come up with an offer and then make adjustments as you learn more about your target market and more about your customer expectations. But in the end, we have to have an offering that goes to market that represents a customer experience, and that has to come from you. You will become the technical expert on that throughout the time that you are in business. You will make adjustments, you will add and subtract. But right now we're in startup mode, so we want to make sure that you are going to come up with an offer to the market. Then we want to know who your customer is going to be. Start with the basics. Is it a consumer? Is it a business? Or is it the government? You can start with that basics. And then next week, we will start about really narrowing in and targeting that particular customer to the list. It's worth you thinking through what your customer values, not what you value, what your customer values, okay? That's very, very important. And then you want to figure out how to deliver it at a appropriate cost. So you'll talk about benefits, you'll talk about needs, and then I always want you thinking about how do I differentiate myself ever so slightly from all the competitors out there. Some of you probably have an idea that is fairly unique. Some of you I know are looking at technological innovations which should be unique if you can find a customer base. Many of you are thinking of businesses that already exist in some mode. And you're the ones that I want you to really think about what will be different about your offering and your customer experience versus what is already out there. So when we start doing competitive analysis and things like that, we'll want to play from there. We are searching for commercial viability. One, you have to get paid for it. So you have to figure that out, and you have to find a sufficient number of customers. I often tell people in my many years in consulting, I've never seen a bad idea. And then I correct myself and I say, that's not true. I've seen 2 bad ideas in my lifetime. But I have seen a lot of ideas that are not commercially viable for a full-time business. So that's why I want you to really look at finding a sufficient number of customers. And then, of course, I want you to have a business model. And in the end, there are multitudes of definitions on how to do a business model. and what it means. But in the end, I like to break it down to something that people can concentrate. So we need your experience or your value proposition. You need a way to make money. That's why we do the budget, because we can add up your cost. We can put in all the things in it that are necessary for you and investors, and we can determine if we have a pricing strategy that allows us to make money. And then, of course, you'll need to identify the key resources and key processes that are necessary for you to be successful. In the end, all of you will fit one of these 6 categories in terms of the types of business you are. Some of you are going to make something from its base level. You'll be a manufacturer. It's the core of the economy of the United States and most of the world. It's not the only way to make money, but if you are going to manufacture a device or manufacture a product, you are at the core of that. It's interesting. It gives you access to wholesalers and retailers and a lot of different business strategies to reach the customer, because in the end, you are making the end product that is necessary. So manufacturers, I often say, are some of the most important businesses, and some of the they have a great chance of success. The difference as a manufacturer is generally a business that will require some investment. It's very difficult to bootstrap a manufacturing operation because you need to have raw materials, you need to have equipment, you need to have all of those things in order to be able to make the product before it is ready for sale. I'm sure there are some folks online and that are thinking of going into retailing, becoming a retailer. Jewelry stores, clothing stores, beauty products, all of those can be sold through retail outlets. The advantage of retailers at this day is you have 3 options. One, you can open your own store. The second option you have is you can do it all online, or the third option you have, and the term that is being used in consultant services circles, is you can have a bricks and click type of business operation where you actually have a store and you also sell online. The advantage of a location, of course, is customers come in, they can interact with you, you can create that kind of customer experience. The advantage of online is it may allow you to reach well beyond the geographic sphere of where you're actually located. Some years ago, about 10 years ago, I worked for a firm in York County, just to give you how online works. This was a woman-owned business who collected African artifacts. She actually went to 2 countries in Africa every year and brought back artifacts. When she approached me, she was having trouble with sales. And the reason is because she brought all of her artifacts back to her store in York County. And when we laid out the demographic profile of her customer, the folks in the immediate vicinity did not create a sufficient base to make her a profitable business. So we shifted her business online. And of course, her target market then became the continental US. We simply used the profile she had for York County and said, let's broaden this to the US. So you can see the advantage retailers now have and the advantage of operating online. It really can take what is a very unique market. That was what was interesting about her. It was very, very interesting artifacts. And it was hard for other people to copy her, but her market in just York County was not big enough to be commercially viable. When she went online, she gave herself more folks to be able to do that. Many of you will talk about service businesses. I've heard from a number of folks in the center over the past week that are thinking of a variety of service businesses, from accountants to tax preparers to consultants. All of those are there. Lots of these businesses make money by project cost or billable hour, and we'll certainly have our fair share. Some of you may be considering being a middle person, a distributor, or a wholesaler. You're a wholesaler. You're the person in between the manufacturer or the retailer and the service. The real important thing, if you are considering that middleman, is because you sort of get a cut, is that you make sure that you have a very significant value add Otherwise, most likely, people will try to bypass a wholesaler or distributor, but it's a pretty common form of business. Many of you will be considering contractors, whether it's government contracting, whether you build things, all of those are elements. And then the one that I added some years back, just about 7 or 8 years, is the platform business. The platform business is for those of you who are trying to create a technology marketplace or something along those lines. The difference, what a platform brings to bear, is the linear model of a business, say a manufacturer to a wholesaler to a retailer, goes away. You actually create an ecosystem where people on both ends work and they use your system or your technology system to make contact. This world is the world of influencers we see now. They actually use technology firms like TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, of course, was one of the, they weren't one of the originals, but they're one of the ones that got very big, where people are actually bringing together both what it's. eBay is a great example of someone who brings together folks with all kinds of products to people that they can be sold with. And eBay's platform is to be able to make that technology sing. Everybody else brings the other things to the table. Very, very profitable if you can make it work. But trying to get those markets together in that ecosystem is the real crux of that. And I'm sure we've got a couple of technology ideas in there. There will be some of you who will be hybrids. It's not unusual for a manufacturing operation to make parts or even to provide service. It's not unusual for a wholesaler to be a pass-through where they stock an inventory and then they also service products. A great example of this that you see virtually every day in our homes are HVAC contractors. The local HVAC contractors actually sell the manufacturer's devices to you, and then they will service them. So the manufacturers actually sell to the distributors who actually get it to the consumers, and then they're able to service the product from there. So you can see HVAC contractors have a very good value add, even though they're not the ones that make the products to begin with. Once you define your products and services, you need to look at your supply chain and your processes. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just want you all to take a look at this slide. It covers a lot of the things that become cost. And as you can see, once you start looking at these and you identify a cost, this is what goes over on your income statement. Okay, so we start to build a budget with regard to that. Production and service are important. Some of you may be thinking of operating one-person businesses and everybody is a freelancer or an individual vendor. But some of you will hire employees. And if we hire employees, we're going to have wage infrastructure that has to be built into your cost. Any number of you will hire vendors and suppliers that will be important to you. Some of you, I was talking with Tiffany earlier, some of you may hire people to run your websites and things like that if that is necessary. But you need to identify your vendors and your suppliers, and you need to make sure you know what they're going to cost you, and you build that into your income statement. Any number of you, particularly those of you considering manufacturing or those of you considering retail operations and actual stores, will need various types of equipment, and you need to budget those out and what those costs are. And then investment and timing. I always like to tell people operating competitive advantages. Very tough to do for small businesses that are starting, okay, because most of this advantage comes getting really good at what you do, and you can buy and scale and all of those sort of things, or buy in larger amounts. But I always like to put it up here just in case any of you have any ideas that might be applicable. When you start talking to your suppliers, I always like small businesses to have 2 or 3 suppliers for every item that they're going to be able to do. And the pandemic made that important to everybody. The run-of-the-mill management element before the pandemic was get everything just in time. You wanted people who were inventorying, you wanted to be able to get it the day or two that you do it. Even our major manufacturers that way. The shift over the past 2 years because of the pandemic is now get it just in case. So you will want to be able to do that. The way to do that is to make sure that you have secondary suppliers always in place. I always tell people I want 3 suppliers. I want the one that I'm very, very happy with and I'm dealing with. I want a second one that I give a little bit of business to just to keep them interested and calling on me. And I'd like to know who the third player is in the market. And hopefully they're sending their sales rep to you all the time just to break in to the first 2 categories. I really want to prevent you from ever facing a critical element shortage or anything like that. And then as we go through management in the latter part of the course, we'll talk about operational metrics. Stop there. Any questions, Tiffany, or anything we need?
No, just a quick, I guess, clarification. So creative people
Yes.
who like make their own products, they are considered manufacturers and retailers, correct?
Absolutely. In both, it's a very good point. If you are an artisan and you are actually making your painters, that's quite right. You can see you're the manufacturer. Now think through what we talked about up here. The options an artisan has, if I can find that. You're actually manufacturing the product that's doing that. You might go to a studio and they carry and do all the retailing and the wholesale. You might, as Tiffany identified, be the manufacturer, and then you set up an online business so that your customers can come direct to you, sort of deal directly with the artist, which I would think would be kind of cool. Right. Okay. But there are lots of people to do that. You might take advantage of both of those. You might start out online. As you get a reputation, you might be approached by the retailers in that profession, and they want you to do shows and they want to retail those elements. So it's a very good point. Artisans, you're actually the manufacturer of the creative component, and you can see why manufacturers are both important and why they have large potential for success, because they're right at the core, they're right at the start. They make the products and services. As long as you've got something the market wants or demands, you're in pretty good shape. But the other part is you have to make that initial investment up front. It's a very difficult thing to bootstrap. You will have to be able to do that in that regard. So it's a very good example of something that crosses all of those. So I was going to spend we're in good time here. I was going to spend the next 2 minutes walking through a full-time startup and showing you that, and then a part-time startup. And then we'll talk about our high growth folks at the end to give you a feel of what this process looks like. This is actually a real business that I worked with 15 years ago. She is still in existence. She's over on the peninsula, so I'm hopeful you all can't do it. But I wanted to use it because it's a normal business. It's not this great new technological innovation or anything like there. And I wanted you to see how this woman differentiated herself. So in the end, I'm going to call her Jane. That's not her name, but Jane had worked for florists all her life, wanted to start her own business, and she actually thought she had some unique ideas around arrangement. She had learned a lot about botany and florists, and she wanted to go out and do those on her own. And there's no magic to that. That is an extension of existing expertise. It gives a great chance for success, but in the end, there are lots of florists. Now, she picked a part of the peninsula that was just beginning to have population growth. So I thought that was pretty smart on her part, because there were lots of florists that were in local areas that already had clientele. She found a location that was out on where the population was beginning to grow and there was new development. And her thinking was a florist will be needed in that area just like any other, and it gave her a greater chance for success. In the end, you can see how the cost here in red begin to opt to her. She had to set up a retail operation. I think by and large, I'm sure there must be some online florists out there, but there are still lots of florists who exist in neighborhoods throughout Hampton Roads and throughout the country. So it really is something that people like to come in and see and be presented to. So it really has a bricks element in addition to a clicks element. So you can see she had to line up when she started her suppliers. She had to come up with a couple of suppliers to provide her what she wanted. She had a couple of unique botany elements that the run-of-the-mill or the very large wholesalers did not have. And so she had a supply chain that was actually about 7 or 8 companies deep, not all of them in Hampton Roads. In her case, to keep her costs down, she hired a delivery operation and ran it once a day. She took stuff till 3 o'clock, and if you didn't get it in by 3 o'clock, it was going to go the next day. So she couldn't do anything after 3 o'clock. But you can see she created a little bit of advantage for herself here because she didn't have to buy a truck. She didn't have to hire an employee. She hired a service and paid them a fee. They came by once a day and took all her deliveries out for that day, absent the folks who came in. And but then she also had to train people in the product line. As I said, she did have some unique ideas on floral arrangements and things like that. She decided to hire one employee at the start, and she did, and she was going to have to train them in that product line. So you can see now we have added wage, we have added payroll taxes, and we have added the cost of hiring and all of that sort of stuff. Just one employee. Workman's comp becomes part of your insurance policy. All of those things that you saw in the income state now become real expenses. And in her case, she paid this, she did payroll every 2 weeks. So you can see how that 12-month statement turns into a real operating document on what your costs are going to be. She did set up a location. She did her homework. She got out on the in her case, it was out into a growing part of the northern part of Newport News, and she found a location that was had convenient parking and all of those sort of things to be able to do that. If you guys know her, I don't want you to say it, okay? So I tell them I won't use their real name. And of course, then she incurred the expenses of the location setup. There were displays, desks, all of the things for customers to pay you in place. You can see how all those costs add up. Now let's talk to you about her customer experience. When I was working with her with startup, we added all of this up, okay? And the trouble was she needed a certain amount of money to be able to start the business, and she didn't have quite enough. So we were going to bootstrap her operation. Now remember, all bootstrap means, okay, is that you're going to get enough sales in to be able to produce enough products to make up for the difference between what you should have had when you started and what you didn't have. And this was her customer experience. She did a very, very good job with signage, okay, so that everybody knew she was there. And this was her theory. And now, since I know we might have a couple of people in the center who might know who she is, if you ever walked into her floral shop, she literally came up and started selling to you to find out what she was doing. But she had a method to her master. She wanted to know your name. She wanted to know if you were married. She wanted to know if you were kids. If she could get that far with you on the first conversation, she would collect dates for birthdays and things like that. So she not only wanted to sell you a floral arrangement, she wanted a demographic profile of you so that she could remarket to you. She did it in a pretty engaging way. Of course, flowers are nice things to talk about. It's very easy to engage people about those sort of things. But whenever someone walked out of her store with that, they walked out with the arrangements she wanted with these slightly different elements. She walked back over to her register. She started before there were real great database systems about 15 years ago, and she would write on a card. She has since can put this into a database, who that person was and all the information she had gotten on, okay? Telephone numbers, email addresses, all of those things, and the right to remarket to. Then you can see that's what she put in place. Literally every Monday, she walked into her store the day that she was not the busiest or where the orders coming in from the national telefaxes were the major components. And she would every 2 weeks see who the people were that had been in her store, and she would remarket to them. God forbid you told her a birthday or anything like that. She just had a real remarkable way to be able to do that. And then, of course, over time, email strategies and text strategies had become a very effective way to do that. So you can see her customer experiences was come in. I want to find everything out about you so that I can service you and your family for all of your floral needs. That was her idea. She built that into a database. She obviously made an initial sale, and then on a weekly basis, she would look at her growing database of customers and then remarket based on, I found out he had a wife and their anniversary was this. And then every time you talked with her, she got a little bit more demographic information. She actually got pretty good after she engaged with you once or twice. She would send you an information trying to get all that information, telling you that I really want to be able to send you reminders, okay? Which it determined the men in her audience really liked it. I think the women did too. But you can see how this is a relatively simple business. It has significant costs that need to be taken into account. She put together a customer experience that was tied to her unique arrangements, but then she also captured information so that she could remarket to people on and on. She was profitable within 4 months of starting her operation. That allowed her to bootstrap her business. And this is one of those folks I told Tiffany about it that I met in my lifetime. After I had worked with her and revisited her for a couple of years on a quarterly basis, she had a nice little business that you could go here, here, and here with. You could really grow it. She wasn't interested in that. Her interest at the start was she had unique arrangements and she wanted to run her own little store and be her owner. And that's all she wanted. And she's done very well with that. It has produced the income goals that she's wanted. And she got there after just 2 or 3 years. So she wanted to do this one thing and was not interested in growth. So you can see that's a nice little fill out. What I want you to know is you can see she defined her products and services. She determined what was necessary to build this customer experience. When you walked into her store, you would get this type of treatment, and it was almost always her. I'm sure she taught her employee how to do it as well, but it was almost always her at the start. And then you can see she built a business to get new revenue, and she built a business to get recurring revenue. And let me tell you, if you come up with a business model that has both of those, you can go a long way operating a profitable small business. Stop there and make sure we don't have line.
Nope, we're good.
We're good?
Mhm.
Good. Those of you in a part-time startup, this is fairly recent. Individual's been around 5 or 6 years. This individual had a full-time job, okay? But in his case, he loved baseball. And he wanted to, his goal was to make enough money over 4 or 5 years to fund a college education for his youngsters. I think most of you know that gets pretty expensive these days, anywhere from maybe $40,000 to as much as $90,000, depending on the school you go to. If you go to Ivy League, it's probably even more than that. In this particular case, he knew how to teach kids to pitch and to, as they say in the lingo, he would say how to stretch them out. So he could teach a youngster how to pitch over time as they grew into their body, and he could get them into the range that was necessary or determine whether the individual could do that within a couple of years. He set up an offering to do things with individuals if you could afford that. And if you couldn't afford that, he would put them into a small groups, never more than 4 or 5 people. And he had a set schedule when he was available, always after hours with his business. And then he added a little nuance. Once he had done it for 6 months, he actually started having a quarterly event for all comers, but he charged a fee to come to. And in this particular case, he would do things. He got to know some of the name sports folks. Keep in mind, we all think of the major league players in sports, but there are plenty of folks that will come to see a minor league player or come to see a good, really good high school player that's been to college or things like that. So his events always had some star element to them that they brought in. But you can see the quarterly event, which he did one day on a weekend every quarter, brought multitudes of people. So he made a lot of money on that particular Saturday. His facilities were not were straightforward, but still had some cost. It takes remarkably little to teach kids to pitch, but he did have a garage in the backyard set up where he could work. He had a real long garage so that you could do 60 feet 6 inches. He occasionally had to rent facilities in the region. Okay, now we have things like DBAT, but there were old centers actually tucked away in industrial zones who would rent and have facilities by the hour. And he actually did some training in various product lines for that. But so you can see there was an initial cost here, not a terrible cost. This came up from time to time, and whenever this happened, this is what we talked about last week. He always made sure that that cost was covered by that event or that individual if he had to rent an individual facility. His process was very straightforward. He had a lot of knowledge on the mechanics of teaching youngsters to pitch as they grew up through the ages of 12 to 18. And he actually set up a film and a visual component with his computer so that people could see and you could sit down with someone and talk through the idiosyncrasies of learning how to pitch. I can't pretend to understand that, but he could. He actually worked with an individual who's still in the area. He uses an iPhone to film. His iPhone is a marketing camera for him. So he didn't have to build out a big studio or anything like that. You can transfer it, you all probably know, onto a computer. And he was very, very good at being able to not only sit down and talk with someone, but to show pictorially what was going on. And then, of course, the metrics were very straightforward. They kept youngsters to certain pitch counts. As youngsters grew up, the speed gun was used to measure that they were improving. So the metrics could be watched by both him, the pitcher, and of course, the parents who were paying the bill. His promotions were straightforward. He would talk to every coach in the region and let them know that he was one. He was not the only one, by the way. He's not the only one in the region that does this sort of things. But he was constantly marketing to the coaches. So once he built himself a database of that, he would do that. And then a couple times a year, he had to sit down and say, who were the coaches that left? Who were the coaches that got new jobs in high schools and middle schools and junior highs around the region? He used business cards, although not very much. And he built himself a small Google website, okay, which is nothing more than something that lets everybody know if you put his name in with pitching, he will show up with a small website. Google has a nice course for those of you interested in part-time businesses that just has name, address, telephone number, but you show up online, okay? You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on a website or something like that, but you will show up on Webline, and that's becoming sort of a rite of passage for small businesses these days. You need to be on the web. You don't have to be there with flamboyant websites, but if someone goes looking for you, they need to be able to find you on the web. Google's got a nice little course where they show you how to do that in a minimalist way. So you can see his customer experience was one-on-one coaching for each individual that he worked with. Very custom, very that. I question whether or not there is enough of a market for this full time, but he was doing it part time. Now, I think there probably is a market for full time, but I think you have to be talking to major league players and people who have sums to spend at one time. But you can see very good customer experience, one-on-one coaching, where I can talk to parents, I can talk to the youngsters, and I can show you visually and measure how you're improving. And then that was his revenue source. He's done quite well. I know the youngster that he wanted to put into college is there. He's had another, but he'll have a few more years to be able to do that. And he's still out doing this. So this is a good example of a part-time startup, okay? Yeah, in the end, this individual makes $15,000 to $20,000 a year in the part-time business. I don't know what his costs are, but I know they don't amount to much more than 20 or 30% of that. So you can see what passes through. He probably has to pay some taxes because he definitely makes money. But this is what I mean when I said last week, where I want those of you considering a part-time effort to get all your costs in working order so that you know you're making money every step of the way. This is what he did. He charged enough to know he was making money if he worked with an individual. If you were an individual that couldn't afford, okay, the individual rate, he would put you in a small group so that he could still make the other one. And then he added a little bit to his income by having quarterly events, which he could price out and turn into like a trade show or things like that. And as I said, he did that with a little bit of star power, and you'd be amazed. He didn't have to invite the Major League Baseball players to his quarterly events. There were youngsters, of course, who knew who the good players were in high school. They knew he would get some college players who had gone on and come back. And those were folks that could be advertised to make his event successful. Question or anything? Yeah, sorry.
When you're talking, can you stand right up here? So they can hear you. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, very good. Very good. Okay. So I hope I block the thing. Now, I also know we have some high growth folks in the group, and I don't want to do all of this today. I just want you to concentrate on these top 5. Here's the danger of you with a high growth technology startup. The good news is you're trying to come up with something that's really unique, and that is going to hold you in good stead. But the world of small business startup is littered with technology startups where people thought they had a really interesting technology that nobody or not enough people wanted. So I want you concentrating on those first 5 questions. Who is your customer? What is the product or service or need that you're trying to create? You have that unique element. Jane, my florist, didn't have to worry about that. We know people buy florals. They have needs for floral arrangements from time to time and all of that sort of stuff. But those of you with technology startups and things like that are going to need to make sure that you're not building something that nobody wants. And the world of technology is littered with that kind of thinking. So I want you to make sure that you think through what you're trying to do. You test it with lots of customers and maybe competitors, just with lots of people, to make sure that it's a need that's out there. And then all of these other things we'll do over the next week. The advantage for those of you, however, and the thing to keep in mind for a technology startup, if you've got a unique idea, the good news is you're likely to create a barrier to entry, because if you have a unique product, even if it's a trade secret, it can't be patented. If it's in your head and you can build it out, it's hard for competitors to get to it. And if you can patent it or trademark it or do a copyright, you might be able to put some intellectual property protection that prevents them from being able to do it and buys you some time as you get into the market. The trouble is intellectual property considerations will be a cost that some of the other businesses will not have to incur. And it's usually a fairly significant legal fee. I've worked with 5 technology startups over the past year, and this intellectual property consideration cost was a $5,000 to $10,000 expense. So I want all of you that are considering a high growth or a technology startup, you need to move to protect your product as soon as you know it has commercial viability. And generally, I don't think you can do any of this on your own. You're going to need to consult intellectual property attorneys and things of that tenure in order to be able to make it work. The other thing that when you're doing your budget is if you have a technology startup and a new idea, research and development now becomes a line item, because you will make constant changes. You will put your product out there. Customers will react to it. They will want new and different services and things that you can do, and you're going to have to spend the time to continue to develop your product. So R&D is a more significant expense for the high growth technology startup than it is for most of the other businesses that fit there. So very important for those of you considering high growth or technology startup to make sure you don't build something that people don't want. Okay, the good news there is you're trying to come up with something that's distinctive, but remember it has to be something that people will pay for. If you get there, you can create a barrier to entry using intellectual property considerations, and that's an upfront startup cost that you will see that most other folks will not. And then just remember, when you're building out your spreadsheet, you're probably building out spreadsheets for 1 to 5 years. R&D becomes a line item that is not in the spreadsheets for, say, florist or more typical retailers and service businesses. So let's walk through the various ways or the things that are developed that can deliver a customer experience. I break them down into 8 categories. You could probably break them into 35. But we'll go through one and I'll just give you a couple of examples so you all get a feel for how you might think through developing your customer experience. What you see here are essentially the 8 strategies, and then the things in parentheses tell you what the net profit margin is. So you can see developing a distinctive competence or a platform business has a profit margin that's greater than 10%, okay? And in many cases, it's much greater than 10%. Some of our big technology firms have grown into firms with profit margins in the 30 to 70% range. So it gets interesting. We'll talk about Ikea and combined activities. And then down here at the bottom, are the more typical things that many of you will do. Low cost, experience, winning moves, but generally your net profit per tax may end up somewhere between 1 to 5% unless you can find a real niche. And then we'll talk about one of the more recent strategies, promotion strategy, as it goes here. So a couple of examples quickly so that we do that. Distinctive competence. This is usually a new idea or a new technology. Greatest chance for profitability. You can see here just what we talked about. You'll need an intellectual property strategy. You are trying to create a barrier to entry. Part of the experience will be constant R&D and engagement with your customers. And then you see a couple of examples there. On a large scale, there's a very large firm out there, Qualcomm, that uses patented technologies for chips. You all are probably familiar with Apple. Apple doesn't do everything with patented technologies. They do some of the things with their platforms, but they have plenty of patents that they've protected. Microsoft is another good software provider that has used patented patents and copyrights to protect their businesses for a certain amount of time. On a smaller scale, what we've seen even in Hampton Roads is small biotech startups. These are the folks from scratch trying to create new medicines and drugs and medical equipment. You should recognize for everything that reaches us that get used when we're in the doctor's office, 83% of that innovation is not done by the largest pharmaceutical firms. It's done by small biotech firms. They usually get bought by some of the larger firms or anything along those lines. So that gives you a real good example of a distinctive competence. The advantage, of course, and why the profit margins are potentially higher is if you can patent technology and keep competitors at bay, you can charge a higher price tag. And generally, if you do have a new idea or a technology that has a broad base of customers, you have a chance to be a small business that becomes a good mid-size or a larger business.
We have a question.
Sure.
How do you get started creating a prototype for a tech business?
Question, a prototype with a start making very good question. If you are interested in starting a prototype, my recommendation would be in Hampton Roads, there are 3, they call them makerspace, MAKERSPAC elements. Tiffany and I were just talking about Selden Arcade. There's one down at the Slover Library. There's one on Hampton There's one in Norfolk. I would get to those makerspace facilities, and they have lots of things that can allow you to do prototype development. And you're right, it's a very good question. Technology startups, to get anywhere as a technology startup and raising money, I always tell people the first thing you have to do is have a prototype, and then you have to move to protect your product. So it's a very good question, and I would use the makerspace. If the person doesn't do that, tell them to email me and you, and I'll get them the links to the makerspace folks in Hampton Roads.
Okay.
Any other?
No, that's it.
Okay, very good. Platform businesses. We talked about this. You'll probably come down here to the bottom and talk about first. A very good example of a platform business is Facebook. Some of the great technology businesses around, but I've always had a good way of differentiating. TikTok is a technology platform that connects people. They make money through their in-app element and through advertising that they sell to people, because lots of people come to the site. But the means of production are the people who are selling videos or influencing, and on the other end. So they actually create an ecosystem or a market potential for those individuals. You have to develop a significant following, but that's an advantage of a platform. Facebook, I think we're all familiar with, is another excellent example of a platform. They make their money off advertising, but they bring together groups of individuals, and actually all those groups of individuals do most of the work. As opposed to another great technology firm, Netflix. They're a traditional business. They may be a head-type technology delivery system, but they are a very traditional business. They have to produce content, they have to buy film, or they have to produce film, and then they have a nice streaming technology that takes that out, and they've been able to build that out on an international basis. So a high-tech technology firm that uses a traditional business model. TikTok is the platform businesses. It's worth a read. There are a number of very good books on platform businesses if you're considering this. Once again, the potential for profitability, if you get this right, is important, because you can have intellectual property, a barrier to entry. Once you begin building the ecosystem, it's just hard for people to catch up, okay, until they get tired of you. What usually happens to some of the great platforms is the younger generation wants a new one, and so they top it. Actually, I think TikTok would tell you their major competitor is Facebook, and they've been able to make inroads against Facebook by attacking the younger generation. So that's how that works. But you own the means of connection. I always like that term, versus the means of production. The people in your ecosystem bring that to bear, and it's why this type of business can be profitable. Not that easy to do, but I'm sure there are a number of folks with technology ideas in the group who are thinking of that. And it is a very good, it's worth the effort, and it has the chance for high profitability. It has the chance for high growth because it's done online. The third element is combined activities. This is where you look at all your normal stuff and you try to put together a combination that gives you an incremental advantage over competitors. And there are a number of examples of this. The one I chose for our course today was Ikea, the great big store. In the end, Ikea is a furniture store, okay? And there were furniture stores around long before Ikea came along. But they looked across this whole supply chain, this whole customer experience, and they came up with a method by which they could find furniture that people would buy at a lower cost that they really liked versus the furniture manufacturers. So you can see that's who they compete against. And they have a series of reinforcing activities that offer them a competitive advantage. And I believe their profit range is around 7 or 8%. I know this could be about 45%. And you can see what Ikea did. They actually don't go out to the furniture designers. They do everything in-house, okay? They have low manufacturing and logistical costs, because in the end, they're going to make you build it, okay? So that's the other ones. They do large stores, very large stores compared to most furniture manufacturers, with the exception of folks like Haynes and like that. So they get the economies of scale of a very large store, and they eliminate a lot through customer self-selection and assembly. that unique combination activity allows them to be more profitable than the traditional stores, as long as you're an individual willing to build your own furniture. Now, there's still room in the market for the traditional furniture stores, but that's how IKEA became an international phenomenon, competing against a well-established furniture manufacturer. I would encourage all of you to look at your activities when you draw up those process charts and see if you can find a unique combination of activities that give you an incremental advantage and allow you to be more profitable. This is a very, very good strategy, and I think lots of small business owners don't think enough about it because they get into a normal day-to-day flow of activity. Total solution providers are pretty straightforward. This is when customers want a one-stop shop, okay? And they want somebody that can do everything. In the end, the needs are determined by the customers. There's a need to integrate, and most of these firms don't do all of this. They actually have to build out their supply chains because they're not experts at everything, but they use subcontractors, and they offer that as one package to an individual. This can be very profitable for the customers that want it, and you all can probably think of that. The Inc. 500, which is one of the great articles written every year on the successful small businesses in the country, is loaded with IT services firms that provide enterprise-wide IT services. So that's an obvious example we've probably all encountered. A Black-owned business, Baldwin Richardson Foods, has been around for a couple of generations. They actually help companies make ingredients for food, and they do everything from creating the idea to creating the component. And I think I went back one. They do everything from creating the idea to commercialization, and the customer ends up with a package. So you can walk in as a food manufacturer and say you need something, and you can walk out of Baldwin Richardson. Actually, it takes some time. You can't walk out that day. But they will actually help you create food and things like that. Total solution provider from idea all the way through having the packaged product that is ready to be sold. Many of you will consider this. I discourage it, okay? But it's a legitimate strategy. And that's the low cost element that fits in here. Beware those of you saying to yourself, I will have lower overhead than all of my principal income customers. That's not true. Overhead is a unit number divided by the number of customers. So while your rent may be a little bit lower, if I'm your competitor and I'm spreading my rent over 1,000 customers and you've got 5, it's your cost that is higher. Okay, so I just want many of you, don't let that low overhead and I can charge a lower price get in, okay? There's only one way a low-cost strategy works, only one, okay? You have to be the low-cost producer. So you have to think through that supply chain and be able to do that. And generally, a low-cost strategy is the place where where large businesses go to play because they have the advantage to take advantage of economies of scale. The obvious example is Walmart. This is a Black-owned business, G Plus Cooperative. They actually have a small niche. They do, I bought pockets and men's accessories. They're actually moving into it. They started with men's accessories. And so they found a little niche market that no one's paying attention to. And they do quality fashion at affordable prices. So that is an example of an online retailer. So you can see one of the ways they've reduced their costs by selling online, and they're a fairly unique market subset, so they want access to the entire country. In the end, I always tell people this business model, the customer sets the price. You don't start with what you get to charge. You figure out what the customer will pay for it, $9.99, and then you figure out a way to deliver at the required price and to make a profit. I guarantee you that's what Walmart does. They sit down with their suppliers and they figure out a customer will pay this much We will be the low-cost vendor in the majority of circumstances, and then they figure out a way to build out and make that product at that cost. It may be a little lower quality, but once again, their target market is what they're after, and of course, they've been very, very good at it. They're not the only ones that are very good at it. It's just an obvious example that we do that.
You have a question? So if you have a product such as a book, what would be the process to get it into a retailer such as Walmart?
Oh, well, you'll have to sell it. And if you write a book, there's the chance to self-promote it online. But if you're going to those major elements, you're going to have to find I forget the middleman for the book, but you're actually going to have to go to the wholesalers that they buy from, present your book, and get that put into it. So that would do it. I wouldn't hesitate, just given that it's offer, I wouldn't hesitate to walk in and ask. But I think in the most circumstances, those large stores are not going to have the ability to buy your book and put it on the shelf. They're going to refer you back into the infrastructure that gets books into the store. You never know. You might find a customer. That's where I start to worry about whether or not it will do that. But I assume this individual wants to be in all of the Targets or all of the Walmarts, and in that case, they're going to have to find a wholesaler that fits into that in that particular case. They can obviously market the book online, but I don't think that's going to get them into Walmart.
Right.
Fair enough. And there was another one.
Oh, no, that's for me.
Gotcha. Very good. So that's low cost, but fairly typical for small businesses. Often a mistake. Okay, often a mistake. I'd much rather you find a more profitable niche where you can charge a higher price. But you'll hear lots of small businesses say that they're smaller, so they have lower overhead. It's just not true. Entrepreneurial folklore is what I call it. Many of you will just create experiences. Okay, you have a service. There are competitors out there, and you'll differentiate with customers based on what they prefer and how they want to experience them. Okay, so they like you. This is when you hear people say our business is built on relationships. Okay, they have salesmen or they have a manufacturer. The key here is making sure your market is large enough, okay, for that type of activity. You will always face competition, but you can see there are a number of very, very good examples out there. Most engineering, I was in the engineering, maintenance, and construction business for 15 years of my life. We had a very successful run, but it was a highly competitive business all the time. I can absolutely tell you that 1 to 5% is correct. We made 3 to 5% routinely, and 5% was a good year. And so things broke out, or a project that came out of nowhere that we didn't expect came in. HVAC contractors are local ones. Many of you will be familiar with many of us give our money to investment firms for them to be able to invest. There are multitudes of them. Okay, and generally that's based on trust of who we think will give us the greatest return. Very difficult for these firms to differentiate themselves, except pleasing their customers on an ongoing basis. And generally, if they're good at that and they build that they can run a business and be quite profitable, because the demand in this area is pretty significant. There's a heavy built-in demand for managing money. There's a heavy built-in demand for taking care of our homes and our HVAC elements and things like that. And 1 to 5%, I guarantee you, is what they make when everything is said and done. Even more competitive are the folks who live year to year and they get tactical about it. They're always in highly competitive businesses, but they plot a winning move. Usually this winning move is being highly competitive. Okay. They find a customer of another business and who's having pain, and they fill it, and that individual can't. They might do some product market positioning. They might come up with a new adjustment to their product that can go out and that the customers like. Very, very customer specific, and lots of examples of this. Government contractors, some franchise operations. Government contractors literally live bid to bid, and every time a new bid comes out, they're competing against other firms, and they have to come up with, they have to meet the customer needs and things like that and adjust accordingly. The advantage of being a government contractor is often if you win that work, it may be for 3 to 5 year periods. So you know you're going to get it for some time. And then we have Blue Ocean Strategy. This is relatively new. A couple of folks wrote a book a couple of years ago. I think by and large, it applies to existing businesses now, but the first 2 firms that are famous for it that are actually in the book were startups. They look at a supply chain. So we've been talking about customer experiences and supply chain. They look at what the current business is doing and they find out what can they do better, what can they eliminate, what can they reduce, and that's how they make money. So they change the offering to a paradigm. The theory in the book is the world is highly competitive and full of red oceans. And what you want to do is you want to find a blue ocean where there aren't competitors or where you can find a new customer base. Cirque du Soleil, I think that's how you say that. If you all are familiar with this, this is a Las Vegas show. Actually, it's a show outside of Las Vegas. But at their core, these were circus performers who rethought the circus business. And what they did is they eliminated animals, they eliminated travel and started doing it in traditional theaters. They eliminated big name clowns and entertainment. They simply found acrobats that could do the types of things, and then they created content. The result was the price of their ticket versus circuses was less, yet they had less cost, so they made more money. Okay. And they found their way. There were people who will come to see acrobats on stage in Las Vegas, or in Canada, or the many places where they do these shows, but they will never go to a circus. So they found themselves a whole new paradigm and got written up in Blue Ocean Strategy. And I actually met the guy who had this idea, and it was really his thought. He had been a circus performer. When you see Cirque du Soleil, I don't associate it with the circus, but that's how they thought about it from the start. You can still see Yellowtail Wine in your grocery store. The idea here, this is a wine made in Australia, not the wine making capital of the planet. Actually, the guys who started in Australia were Italian, though, from the Italian vineyards. But what they did is they took all the snob appeal out of wine. They eliminated complexity. They didn't go to shows. They didn't feel any need to win awards against other wines. They simply wanted to put together something that could be sold through traditional food outlets, and their product innovation was a little less tannin and acid. That's what wines have. And if you're a connoisseur of wine, that's important. But if you just want easy drinking and ease of selection, taking that out made Yellowtail wine taste better as a basic table wine. The idea was they will appeal to the 85% of the people who don't drink traditional wine. I think actually it comes in a box too, in the grocery store, something like that. But an excellent example, and for those of you considering startup strategies, a very good thing for you to sit down with and see if you can find this kind of niche. This is how profitable businesses are made, to find niches in small businesses. These have both become significant ones, and these conceptions were done at startup.
We have a question.
Gotcha.
Is it ever beneficial for a small business to do pro bono work to build their portfolio?
I'm not a fan. I want you to get paid for what you do. I don't have, I can tell you, I'm working with a technology startup right now who has put his product out there at a reduced price with the idea that his initial beta customers will get him. So that idea is okay. Even his is not pro bono though. He's getting something to cover his basic price along those lines. The disadvantage of pro bono work is you may create the idea that your product does not have value, okay, or that it's going to be at a free or low cost. So I'm not a real big fan of that. I can't tell you it's never been done successfully. I have a hard time coming up with something in my experience where it was done. Don't have anything with pro bono work, but I much prefer you become a small business owner and then you do things for charitable or for your missions or things like that. I wouldn't use it as a basic startup. strategy. And if anybody can prove me wrong, I'll be more than willing to listen. What was
She says she understands.
this?
That's the one you
Understand?
said. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Very good. So then for the final component today, just to summarize this, for those of you, you can use the PowerPoint and all of that, but there was a gentleman who wrote this book, Playing to Win, and how strategy really works in developing a customer experience. And he's got a nice 5-step process there. I just thought some of you who wanted a little simpler format might find. What's your winning aspiration? What do you want to do? Where will you play? How are you going to win? So what's the difference going to be between you and your competitors? Then what are the capabilities that need to be put in place, and then the management system and the financial requirements that are necessary to make it happen. This is a book you can get in any library, Playing to Win, and it's the 5-step process that the individual does for making strategic choices. It's built off some very, very successful large business ideas over the year. I call it the 5 questions. The book is called Playing to Win, and it's just taking what we've talked about and saying, if I wanted this in 5 easy steps, how can we go about it? So I'll stop. Well, let's do resources first. Okay, so once again, adding up the 3 weeks. Your vision description, you can see you're starting to get ideas of it. I really want you to start thinking of what that sales number is going to be in the top of your projection. Next week, we will be talking about geographic scales, but you need to start thinking about what your key products and services are going to be. We, of course, have the definition of the brand. I already want you all thinking about what the owner's salary expectations are, so we get that built into your cost, and what your sales goals are going to be. And 641 for any of you that want to talk to Tiffany or on this week. Let's start determining what your products and services are going to be. Okay. Build the cost as you come into them. I realize you might not do that in the past week, but over the course of the 10 or 12 weeks, as you come across expenses, let's determine what they are and what they're going to cost, and let's put them into your spreadsheet, and then build them out over a 12-week period. Of course, you have